So just to recap a little bit from our first episode, we talked about a lot of things, kind of like your path and the choices that you had to make and those fork on the roads that allow you to become a doctor in clinical psychology, and some of your experiences in that field as well, and kind of like the relation to the individual and the big picture in society as a whole, and the struggle of those two entities, which is a very it's an ongoing process of development, right?
Yep.
And you mentioned something last time about dialectics, I believe it was.
Yeah, dialectics.
Dialectics. I'm sorry, and I just wanted to kind of I wanted to start on that point because that is a topic that I know that you enjoy. I want to.
He's passionate about
it, and I want our audience to understand more about what it is, where it comes from, and why is that important for our individual quest, and for us to understand that either within ourselves but also within the culture.
Right. Yeah. I had in the first episode, I had spoken about dialectics in my life as far as sort of this rebellion, almost chaotic aspect, and then the order aspect, right? And so what I mean by dialectics is really just dualities. So it's it's sort of the good and the bad, or the good and evil, or whatever, right? Yeah, exactly. And that's what I mean. And I think that part of and this is very much from the existential literature. I think Carl Jung actually talks about this extensively.
Yes, he does.
In the idea that in a lot of different situations in our life, whether it be our thoughts, our behaviors, who we are, we face these dualities, right? And it even apparent to me that in certain kinds of actions or activities or behaviors that we engage in, it's possible that they have a good outcome, right? That's really beneficial to you and even adaptive, or it could have something that gets in the way.
Correct. Yeah.
I mean, I was recently speaking to a number of law enforcement officers, and one of the skills, right, that they develop, and I think that human beings develop, is this ability to compartmentalize things. And in a certain sense, compartmentalizing things in your life, right, being able to file it away, put it aside, maybe bury it a little bit, can be really adaptive, right? Especially if it's something that's painful or difficult to deal with or something like that. But at the same time, you're not facing it, you're not dealing with it.
Yeah.
And you're closing yourself off to a part of yourself.
Correct.
And in a certain sense, limiting yourself.
That is so true.
Way, right?
Yeah, it is, because you saw my interview. So I experienced a trauma, and I buried it.
Right.
And I buried it for a long time, and it surfaced at certain points in my life. You know what I mean? And when you don't, and that's what I did. I just chose not to face it. And so facing it was it was difficult, but it wasn't, even when I was trying to face it in those moments, it was very sort of, I'm just going to, you know what? I don't need to, I'm good. I can just kept burying it, until finally I did face it, and it's, so that makes sense to me.
Yeah. And so and then branching out from just that particular point is that, we face these various dualities in our life, right? And, sometimes they're there to protect us, and they can be very beneficial and adaptive, and other times they can get in the way and be and prevent us from growing. Yeah.
Right. Which is what I'm trying to allude to, not facing it all these years,
right.
And then, and burying it was that duality, not, you know what I mean? Yeah. And so I can relate to that.
Yeah. Cause on the one hand, it protected you, right? It was able for you to be able to function, let's say, right?
Right. Sort of.
Yeah. Sort of, right.
Sort of.
Function.
It was manageable.
Yeah. Manageable. Right. Yeah. What I mean by that is function insofar as that it protected you so you didn't collapse. You didn't just fall into despair. You didn't, at that point. That's the idea there.
Yeah. But I would say that there were moments that I did collapse.
Right.
But I didn't collapse in front of other people.
Right.
It was in my own space. Yeah. And then I built myself back up and swept it under the rug and said, okay, I got this. I'm good. Thinking that I dealt with it, but not really dealing with it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And this is one of the reasons why, one of the things we had talked about, I think late in the last in the first episode of mine, we were talking about the pain and the pleasure, right? And that was pain, right? That's what you were confronting.
Yeah, it still is.
And it's still right. And it's ongoing. It's ongoing pain. And in confronting, in order for you to really be able to, in a way, become who you are, who you want to become, right? You have to confront that pain.
Yeah.
And so the model of maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain, which is oftentimes what we're kind of go-to strategies for, maybe how we're socialized, isn't really what has to happen. Now, that's a lot easier said than done, obviously.
Of course.
But confronting that pain is really an important part of that learning process.
Yeah.
So one of the things that this is a perfect conversation to segue into a new venture, something new that you're doing, which is getting your doctorate in philosophy. Yeah. Right, correct?
Because getting a doctorate or getting your PsyD, because you're a psychologist, and then that just wasn't enough pain.
Talk about pain, right?
Pain. Yeah. So you decided to embark on this other aspect.
But what? So obviously you had another why question, which led you to this. And I always loved, personally, as a layman, I love the merge of mythology and philosophy because I believe that it encompasses a lot of the same themes in terms of the individual in relation to society. So one of the things that you both were talking about is the things that we choose to avoid eventually become part of our monsters that happen inside. You mentioned Carl Jung, and he talks about the anima, the animus, the self, the ego,
the shadow,
and the shadow,
right?
And the shadow. But can you talk about that particular aspect? Because it is something that if we suppress it for too long, and when we don't confront it, both as an individual and as a society, it's something that can manifest in our lives in a very negative way and in a very destructive way.
Right.
And how do we go? How does a person, just a regular average person, is able to identify, oh my God, that duality, that positive impulse, the negative impulse, is within me, and I have the potential to destroy or create. How does a person come to terms with that, and how do they deal with that?
Right. I mean, that's one of the most challenging things, aspects, journeys that a person can embark upon, right? I mean, look, the shadow, if you think about it from a Jungian standpoint, right, the shadow is a source of darkness. We see the shadow archetype in popular culture in a variety of different figures, right? We see going to Star Wars,
Darth Vader,
right?
The Joker,
right?
Yes.
The Joker, yes, I would say the Joker's also the trickster.
That's true. He's another archetype.
Right. We can talk about that one another time.
That's another.
But there's elements of that. So, but also we have from a more religious context, we have Satan.
Yes.
Right? So the evil part, right? Mm-hmm. And so, we have a lot of interesting basis for that dark side of humanity, really, is that the response for the shadow. At the same time, then, this is the duality, this is the dialectic, right? Yeah. There's the positive outcropping of the shadow insofar as the source of creativity.
Yes.
And here it is, right? So if you look at some of the most interesting works of art, music, and the creative endeavors, literature, right? It comes from pain. It comes from a darkness.
Oh yeah,
right.
For sure.
And that's a way that folks have been able to, in a certain sense, meet their shadow to be able to create. I think what Carl Rogers calls a novel relational product. What he basically means is something that's new and fresh.
Yeah.
That is relational in a sense that it connects with other people, right? Yeah. So for example, we listen to a song and we can feel the pain that the person experienced because it's our pain.
Because it's our, yes.
Right.
So then that leads me to that leads me into these themes, right? In both religion, mythology, philosophy. Right. It transcends cultures. it transcends races. I mean, I could look at a Nordic mythology right now and see the exact same parallels with the Aztecs at the Incas, you know, or and vice versa with other cultures. So inherently, is this something that is talking about our humanity as a whole, and in the macro sense, you know, but also in the individual sense?
Right. Human beings are storytellers.
Correct.
You know, I think this is an important thing. One way that we attempt to understand what the actual hell is going on around us, right, is by trying to tell a story about it.
Yes.
And I also think that's one of the reasons why one of the issues that we face with modern society is I think we stopped listening to stories. And I'll give you an example of this. You know, historically, cross-culturally, and there's certainly a lot of cultures that still engage in this practice. And I'm speaking in a more broad way in kind of a Western tradition here, Western sort of modern tradition here. But one of the ways that you were able to transfer or transmit a cultural knowledge was through the elders of a particular group.
Yes.
Right. And this is part of the storytelling. You know, an oral history is another way of thinking about it. And what you see now is, how do we treat our elder population?
Oh, partly.
You know,
we want to just keep them aside.
That's right.
They don't exist.
And I actually think that that's part of our fear of death.
Yes.
Right?
Okay.
We want to separate ourselves away from, because they represent the end of life. Right. And so we stop listening to them. We say, oh, there's grandpa going on about that thing again. You just ignore him, kind of thing. You know, and you're losing an oral history there. You know, and I think that is one sign, I think, of a society that is starting to lose meaning.
Yeah.
Is that we're starting to lose sight and lose contact with our storytellers.